In this section, we'll talk about security considerations regarding WLAN guest access. And in WLAN guest access, we'll cover a number of topics. The first is guest VLAN, and then we'll have a discussion about guest SSID, and then setting up guest firewall, and finally, captive web portals. So let's get started. So first, let's talk about the guest VLAN. Now, in the past, it was common to use separate SSIDs to segment different types of users within an organization. For example, hospitals would assign unique SSIDs and VLAN pairs for doctors, nurses, technicians, and administrators. But this approach has become less recommended due to the increased Layer 2 overhead caused by multiple SSIDs. Nowadays, it's more common to have all employees connected to the same SSID and leveraging radius attributes to assign different user groups to specific VLANs. Now, despite this change, the practice of segregating guest user traffic into separate SSIDs does remain relevant. A dedicated guest SSID ensures that guest devices are kept separate from the employee network, maintaining security and privacy. Now, unlike employee SSIDs, which often employ 802.1x EAP security, guest SSIDs are typically open networks that require authentication through a captive portal. Now, while encryption is not commonly provided for guest users, some wireless LAN vendors have started using encrypted guest access using per user or per device PSK credentials. And now on to guest SSID. It's important to note that a guest SSID should never be hidden and should have a simple and easily identifiable name, such as CWNA guest. And this ensures that guests can easily locate and connect to the network. And in most cases, the guest SSID is prominently displayed on signs in the lobby or entrance of the company offices, making it visible and accessible to visitors. And now let's talk about the guest firewall. Now, the firewall policy is a crucial security component for guest wireless LAN, ensuring that guest user traffic remains isolated from the company network infrastructure. It's essential to segment guest traffic from employee traffic to maintain network integrity. And the recommended approach is to implement a guest firewall policy that permits DHCP, DNS, HTTP, and HTTPS, but restricts access to private networks. Now, these ports allow guest devices to get an IP address, perform DNS queries, and browse the web. Additionally, if employees are required to use a secure VPN connection when connected to an SSID other than the company's, it's recommended to permit IPsec IKE UDP port 500 and IPsec UDP port 4500. The guest firewall policy can actually be more restrictive based on company policies. For example, blocking SMTP and other email ports to prevent spamming through the guest wireless LAN could be done, although it's less relevant now that most mail services use SSL. Additionally, the security policy determines which ports and applications should be blocked or rate limited on the guest VLAN. And now let's talk about captive web portals. Now, when guest users connect to a Wi-Fi network, they often encounter a captive web portal before gaining access to the internet. And these portals, commonly found in airports or hotels, serves as an authentication gateway and provide important legal disclaimers to ensure acceptable behavior. And captive web portals redirect users to a login page when they attempt to browse the web, regardless of the web page that they try to access. Now, this redirection could be achieved through IP or DNS redirection or by using HTTP redirection. And wireless vendors offer both standalone and cloud-based captive portal solutions, allowing customization of the login page with graphics and acceptable use policies and login requirements. And depending on the security settings of the guest wireless LAN, different types of captive web portal login pages can be used, such as user authentication or guest account creation. And captive web portals often leverage Radius servers for guest authentication, and they query the Radius server with user credentials, usually stored in the native database, to validate guest access. Additionally, captive web portals can be used in conjunction with BYOD solutions to authenticate employee credentials, querying an employee database like Active Directory. But captive web portals require user interaction and can be susceptible to issues such as browser or device updates, DNS problems, and user-friendly designs. Also, smart mode vendors implement MAC address randomization to address privacy concerns, and that can lead to frequent reauthentication via captive web portals tied to MAC addresses. Another practice used is implementing per-guest rate limiting to limit the amount of bandwidth used, and also client isolation to mitigate peer-to-peer attacks by blocking station-to-station access.